A warm welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. It's very clear now that Bashar al-Assad has become Syria's former president, and the wealth and power he had acquired over the years now belongs to the people of Syria, thanks to the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a coalition of northern Syria-based Sunni Islamist insurgent groups that evolved from Jabhat al-Nusra, or Nusra Front. It also used to be a branch of Al-Qaeda in Syria. The rebels have been planning Assad's downfall for about a year. According to Abu Hassan al-Hamwi, the head of the HTS, while planning for the operation to oust Bashar al-Assad started a year ago, the group had been preparing for years. He says since 2019, the HTS had been developing a military doctrine that are used to turn fighters coming from disparate, disorganized opposition and jihadist groups into a disciplined fighting force. The Syrian regime launched an operation against opposition forces in northwest Syria in 2019, successfully pushing back the loosely linked factions into Idlib province. After a final battle, after which Turkey negotiated a ceasefire on behalf of opposition forces in the spring of 2020, rebels were confined to a small pocket of land in northwest Syria, where they would remain in a stalemate with regime forces until December of this year. The HTS produced its own weaponry, vehicles and ammunition. A drone unit was created, bringing together engineers, mechanics and chemists to produce its own drones. The Shaheen drone was deployed for the first time against regime forces this month with devastating effectiveness. Artillery military vehicles were disabled by the cheap but effective aircraft. The HTS also reached out to rebels in the south a year ago and began to advise them on how to create a unified war room. Southern Syria had been under regime control since 2018, and despite on and off fighting, rebel groups were forced underground. With the HTS help, an operations room was founded, bringing together the commanders of around 25 rebel groups in the south, which would each coordinate their fighters' movements with one another and with the HTS in the north. The group first and foremost wanted to stop the trend of regional powers led by countries such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia from normalizing relations with the Assad regime after years of diplomatic isolation. It also wanted to stop intensified aerial attacks on northwest Syria and its residents. Then the HTS saw that Assad's international allies were preoccupied, creating a strategic opening. Russia, which provided the majority of aerial support, was bogged down in Ukraine. Iran and Hezbollah, whose fighters were Assad's fiercest ground troops, were reeling from their fight with Israel. HTS launched the operation entering Aleppo on November 29th. Hezbollah fighters attempted to defend the city, but soon retreated. The rapid fall of the city, the second largest in Syria, that took the Assad regime 4 years to wrest from rebel control in 2016, astonished the group. By December 8th, Bashar al-Assad fled the country and the HTS declared Syria finally free of the Assad dynasty, ending its 53-year hold on power. Bringing it back to even more recent developments, the HTS is now in control of Syria, and for the first time in several years, people feel like it's a new beginning. World leaders, however, are determining how to relate with the rebels who are now in power.
Top diplomats from the United States, Turkey, the European Union, and Arab states met in Jordan on Saturday for talks on Syria as regional and global powers scramble for influence over whatever government replaces ousted President Bashar al-Assad. The outgoing Biden administration in the United States has begun engaging with the victorious rebel group, the HTS, which led the assault that ended Assad's rule. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was at the meeting in Jordan, spoke of the Washington's interaction with the group.
We've been in contact with HTS and with other parties. We have impressed upon everyone we've been in contact with the importance of helping find Austin Tice and bringing him home. And we've also shared the principles that I just laid out for our ongoing support, principles, again, that have now been adopted by countries throughout the region and well beyond.
EU foreign policy chief said the bloc is ready to do more for Syria.
Syria faces a hopeful but uncertain future, and that's why we all agreed on the principles that the new leadership of Syria should also follow. That is very important to all of us.
Back in Syria, religious leaders have been leading prayers and rallies where they have called for national unity under the country's new government. Even Syrian Christians pray about the country's uncertain future. On Sunday, a number of Syrian students toppled a statue of late Syrian President Al-Assad in Damascus University, cheering and riding on top of it, indicating the image of the founding father of the dynasty is no longer respected. In the meantime, Hezbollah head Naim Kazim says the Lebanese armed group has lost its supply route through Syria. Israel, on the other hand, continues operating in the UN-monitored buffer zone between Syria and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Israel Defense Minister Israel Katz said on Sunday the threat to Israel from Syria remains despite the moderate tone of rebel leaders who ousted President Bashar al-Assad a week ago.
I want to bring in now international relations expert, Dr. Adoye Omale. Dr. Omale joins us from our Abuja studio. Doctor, thank you for joining us on the program.
Yeah, good evening and thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure having you here. Now, the dust has settled and we're gradually accepting the fact that a rebel group is in control of Syria. There's a lot of hope on the horizon. What do you think hope feels like in Syria today?
Well, it's just unfortunate that this crisis has happened in Syria, though a lot of citizens in Syria are rejoicing. But you agree with me that Syria has been totally devastated for close to almost a decade since the uprising in 2011, the Arab Spring, and they have been having this civil war that have lasted for so long. So to many of them, it is a relief that finally Assad has given way. But there's also a lot of apprehension because nobody knows what is going to play out going forward, especially that there are pockets of spheres of influence around Syria. Of course, you know that the Kurds in the north are likely to ask for their own independence. You have other groups within Syria that may also use this opportunity to ask for their own independence. So it is rather unfortunate that Syria has been engrossed in this crisis that have really taken a toll on their citizens. We also have the Druze and also the Shia and so on that constitute the various groups that are contending within Syria. So Syria has, we continue to uphold them in prayers to see how they can come out of the crisis that has, the fall of Assad has precipitated. It is even more serious that it is a terrorist organization like the HTS that have taken power. That makes it still more difficult to predict because, of course, you know that the HTR is a splinter group from the Al-Qaeda network, and they have a long-standing reputation for their terrorist and jihadi tendency. In fact, the United States designated them as a terrorist organization. So how they can transition from being a terrorist organization to being the government in Syria. We're all waiting to see what happens going forward.
Indeed, they are the de facto government in Syria at the moment. And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that the U.S. government is in contact with these rebels. Just last week, Mohammed al-Bashir, who heads the HTS de facto government in Idlib, was pronounced the interim prime minister. He'll head the transition of the Syrian government, the transition Syrian government, until March 1st, 2025. The rebels have moved fast. Do you get a sense that there is a desire to reconnect Syria with the outside world as soon as possible, knowing that under Assad's rule, Syria was pretty much isolated from the rest of the world?
Well, it's in the interest of Jolani and his group to quickly reintegrate Syria into the international system. Don't forget that the Iranian-backed Assad regime has been a very important component of the axis of resistance, which is led by Iran. And Syria has been one of the major conduits for supply of weapons to Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies in the Middle East. With the fall of this regime, it is clear that Iran has been dealt a fatal blow. Its influence across the Middle East has been seriously undermined. So the current government has no option than to engage with the international community to see how Syria can take its place within the international system. I know that Jolani, because of his background, or the HTS, because of their background, they have been looked at with a lot of suspicion because they have been backed by Turkey. And since Turkey has been backing them, it is left to be seen how it is going to play out. The Israelis and the Americans are also putting a close eye on them. In that regard, Israel has to carry out about 48 bombings to ensure that Syria's navy and air capabilities are destroyed. This is because, and also some chemical weapon factories are destroyed because they are still very skeptical about these weapons or these chemical weapons getting into the hands of the HTS, which can embolden them to begin to move to wage a war against Israel and other interests within the Middle East. So one of the ways that the HTS could be crippled was to carry out airstrike on these chemical weapons and to also carry out strikes on military equipment, aircrafts that the Assad regime has left behind. This will help to check any attempt by the HTS to begin to have other ideas about carrying out their jihadic activities across the Middle East. So everybody is watching to see the approach, but to me, it will be in the interest of the HTS and their backers to engage constructively with the international community to see how they could be accepted, how they could be supported to carry out the reconstruction of Syria. Anything to the contrary will be very counterproductive to them, especially that their foot is not solidly on the ground. The HTS has barely just 30,000 troops. So going into a major war with Israel or even with any of the interested parties may deal a fatal blow to the HTS.
We'll have more conversations with Dr. Adoyi Omale after the break. Stay with us. Back now to the remaining part of my conversation with Dr. Adoyi Omale, international relations expert, on the recent developments in Syria. But some have also blamed the higher cadre of Syrian intelligence officers for Assad's downfall, and they say that this is because many of the domestic policies implemented by Assad was done under their supervision. He catered to their own needs of preserving wealth and power, and in turn they told him, they promised him their loyalty as if he was able to do these things for them. Would you also blame them for having created this weak semblance of power for Bashar al-Assad that eventually fell on December 8th?
No, you see, every tyrannical regime, every totalitarian regime has a date with collapsing the way the Assad regime has done. We have seen it in history. Totalitarian regimes, sit-tight regimes, brutal regimes, they end up the way Assad has done. We saw it in Libya, how Gaddafi ended up, and what has happened, in as much as you could blame the intelligence officers. These officers continue to give a false sense of power and support by the people, but it was clear that with events that were happening very fast within the Middle East, Iran no longer had that capacity to prop up the regime in Syria, and that was what has happened. He must have been given very false intelligence or very false sense of security, but it could be seen that the entire military were already tired of the system in Syria. Also remember that the Syrian economy, the Assad government, because of the war, the Syrian economy has gone down drastically with infrastructure and social services going down. So it was just a matter of time before the regime will collapse. The Russian government, the Iranian government spent close to $30 million to prop up the Assad regimes in terms of support, but that could not even stop the fall of the regime. So I do agree that the intelligence people contributed significantly by giving false intelligence report and waiving the genuine concerns of the citizens and the genuine concerns of the world about the activities that are going on in Syria. Several activities that are not palatable, especially in the 21st century, where we are talking about freedom of people, where we are talking about democracy, and so on. I read in one of the media outlets that women have been given freedom to wear whatever they want in Syria, and so on. All these are things that the Syrian people have yearned for. Don't forget that one of the things the Syrians are going to miss in this in Assad, because you cannot say everything about Assad was bad. Assad maintained the secularity of Syria. The Christians, the Druze, the Shia, the Alawites, and other groups within Syria, they had their freedom to practice their religion. Syria maintained a strong secular presence. But there's fears now with the coming of the HTS and the jihadist terrorist group now taking over power. Whether Syria will continue to maintain this secularity is what is giving the world a cause for concern. If that is not guaranteed, then Syria might break into fragments because most of the groups within Syria will want to have their independence.
Well, that is understandable, because that's exactly what happened in Afghanistan after the Taliban took over a lot of freedoms were denied the people, education, especially for women. So many rights were violated, and that's what exists in Afghanistan today. So that is a genuine concern. We're talking about some of the crimes committed under the Assad government. I'm very aware of the chemical weapons that were used in 2011 and also 2014, I think. The massacres that were committed under Assad's orders, the imprisonments in the infamous Sadnaya prison underground. And these are just some of the horrendous crimes that, he perpetrated under within the regime. But right now he's in Russia, and some have said eventually he will have to face the ICC. Do you see that happening at all?
Yes, he has to account for the human rights violations in Syria. It's becoming a trend in the world now that draconian leaders, despots who terrorize the people, who violate human rights, who carry out genocide or killing against their own people, they have to be brought to account. And that is why the International Criminal Court was set up. So yes, a case could be established against him, and you could see that even some of the key people, some of the key officials of his regime have been hunted or even lynched or even beaten up by angry mobs.
They're talking about public executions for some of them.
Yeah. So if that could happen, then Assad too should not be isolated. Despite the fact that he has sought refuge in Russia, it doesn't really mean a case could be opened against him, and he should stand trial for most of these violations. In fact, stories coming out, the inhuman conditions that people were detained. In fact, we even saw some videos where human beings were fed to lion. One of the key torturers was put on social media where human beings were fed to lions. And those type of issues, he must account for this repression of the Syrian people. If dictators, if presidents like Laurent Gbagbo, Slobodan Milosevic of Croatia and others are having their date at The Hague, there's no reason why Bashar al-Assad should not answer for crimes that he has committed as president of Syria.
There are countries that are watching the developments in Syria and they're thinking, well, that doesn't exist in my country. I'm not killing people. I'm not depriving people of their rights. But then there are still lessons that countries, even like Nigeria, can learn from what has happened in Syria. What do you think some of those lessons are?
Yes, what has happened in Syria has opened a lot of the eyes of a lot of people. In Nigeria, we have the Lukarawa group that is just coming in, a terrorist group, Lukarawa, which the army talked about. We had the Boko Haram. We have the bandits operating in the north. We have several other groups within the country agitating for one form of self-determination or the other. What the lessons from Syria is that there's nothing as good as forging a national unity, forging a nationhood. Civil wars, strifes, conflicts give nobody any, it's not good for any society. And we must create a room for dialogue and to address our differences in a very civil and matured way. If we go the way of conflict, fighting, and carrying out terrorist activity, will do a lot of harm to our country. So that is one lesson that we have to learn from the Syrian conflict. Secondly, we also have to learn that we have to insulate our country from external influences. Syria became a battleground for proxies of the powers that be. Syria became a battleground for these powers, and Turkey is operating at one end, backing a particular group. The U.S. Fighting against ISIS, Islamic States in Syria, the Israelis. So there were several, the Iranians, the Russians, everybody was there. So we must maintain our sovereignty and not allow external influences to come into our country to begin to prop up groups that continue to undermine our national security. That is the second lesson. Then thirdly, our leaders must also know that that they must continue to give purposeful leadership. The people's voice must be heard, and the people must choose their leaders in a very transparent way. And since we have imbibed the culture of democracy, we must continue to sustain it so that everybody will participate and everybody's voice will be heard. So these are some of the important lessons that I think we as Nigeria can learn from the crisis in Syria. We hope that with all this development happening, we will be more tolerant of each other, we will be more receptive to each other as a country, and we will be able to forge national unity and cohesion so that we do not go the Syrian way.
Dr. Adoye Omale, thank you so much for speaking with us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you very much, Amarachi, and I'm always happy to be here on Channels Television.
This is where we end the program today. I'm looking forward to your comments, either on social media or in the comment section on YouTube. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.